Associate Director of Texas Memorial Museum. During this crazy time of the pandemic, I've been thinking about time and how slowly time seems to be passing. I'm here in the Hall of Geology and Paleontology at the museum, and it's just me and the fossils. Fossils are evidence of past life. They tell something about the diversity and the ecosystems of what Earth was like so long ago, thousands to millions of years. That's a lot of time. To become a fossil is actually a very rare occurrence. Not every living thing becomes fossilized. So many things have to take place to become a fossil. The first thing that needs to happen, of course, is that organism needs to die and then be buried rather quickly. That burial and the processes that take place, all this really beautiful chemistry, can lead to a diversity of fossils that we see, especially on exhibit here at the museum. And the fossilization takes on many forms. A lot of us are really familiar with the term petrified wood or petrified bones. And that's probably, when somebody says the word fossil, something that comes to mind. So for example, I've got this beautiful 220 million year old fossil tree stump. It came out of West Texas in what is now Palo Duro Canyon State Park. It's beautiful. It looks like a tree stump. You can actually see the texture of the bark on the outside. On the inside, you can kind of see where there was some rotting that took place because the center is missing. But this is no longer a tree, it's a rock. And it's mostly this really beautiful mineral called red jasper. It's a type of silicate, something very similar to quartz. It belongs to the quartz family. What had to take place to form this fossil is that when the tree was buried by sediment and water, there were microscopic minerals dissolved in the water that percolated through and filled up all the pore spaces within that tree and then crystallized out. So just like if you're growing crystals in your home chemistry kit, or if you have some water that has salt in it and you allow that to evaporate and the salt crystals grow, we get crystals growing within the wood. And what happens is that the crystals grow, fill in the spaces, and eventually replace the wood with all mineral. And so this is what we get here, this beautiful tree that's a fossil, and one that's 220 million years old. It's from the time that we call the Triassic. When we think about petrified bones or fossilized bones, the term is paramineralized, and the same processes take place. So the next time that you might have some chicken or steak for dinner and you actually have a bone, you might notice that bones have hollow spaces in them. So just like the trees, the minerals can fill into those spaces and grow in and then replace that bone with that mineral material. We see that a lot. That's usually in the oldest bones. Some bones are hardly changed at all, and they're still a fossil. Look over my shoulder. We've got a skeleton of a dire wolf. This came from the La Brea tar pits. La Brea tar pits is a very special place in Los Angeles, California. We would describe the fossil skeleton here as something essentially unaltered, which means that we've actually got the bone preserved, but it's just saturated in tar. It's soaked in asphalt. And so what's beautiful about that is that that preserves a lot of details of the structures within the bones and tells us something more about the dire wolves that were living in the Los Angeles area 30,000 years ago. Some other types of fossils that we have do not have any hard parts preserved, and what we get are the soft parts, and it's just the carbon remains. This is a leaf. This is from the Eocene. This is from a fossil site in Colorado. It's obviously a leaf, and we can actually see the stem and the outline, the veins that make up the leaf. This is like a leaf that maybe you collected a leaf off a red oak in your front yard, and maybe you colored over it to get an impression. We got the same features here, but it's just the carbon. The rest of the materials have been driven off, and we're left with this really beautiful fossil plant. Some fossils do not have any hard parts remaining. Usually when we look at the fossil record, we see that most organisms that have some hard part as part of their body are the ones that are more likely to be preserved. For example, we've got a snail fossil. Now this isn't the actual shell of the snail, this is an exact copy of the inside of the snail's shell. So we see all the features that help us recognize that we have a snail, but we don't actually have the shell. So what's happened in this case is that if you can imagine a sea snail kind of minding its own business, hanging around the bottom of the sea, and perhaps something eats it, maybe an ammonite, some other creature, and we've got an empty snail shell that sinks into the mud at the bottom of the ocean, and then the muds fill up that open space within the shell. And then over time, millions of years, that mud turns to stone, and the muds around the fossil, the shell will turn to stone. And then the shell will dissolve, leaving us with this internal cast. This is a type of trace fossil. So an internal cast tells us about the inside of a hard part. The opposite would be an external cast. So we've got an ammonite. This could have been a predator of this snail, living from the same time period. They're both Cretaceous. They're roughly 100 million years old. Sea creatures that we find, their fossils, their remains here in the Austin area. We've got the spiral shape, and we see there's ridges. So this is an example of what happens when you have an external cast. So we get the outside features preserved of the shell of this ammonite. The soft squishy part, if you're familiar with ammonites, looks a lot like an octopus or a squid with the head and the eye and the tentacles out. Those soft parts typically break down, so they're not incorporated into the fossil record, but we get the remains of the shell itself. If you've had a chance to go outside and start looking for fossils, and you need some help getting fossils identified, we do welcome you to send us an email at tmminfo@austin.utexas.edu. Our email is on our website. You can also check out our Facebook page and get that information. But we're really sorry that we can't hold Identification Day, which has been our time-honored event every Austin Museum Day. But we are here and we are available to help identify your finds. So please send us an email and give us a call. And we really look forward to seeing you when the museum reopens.